Alright everybody, I think everything is set up. Sorry about my squeaky chair. Alright everybody, I think everything is set up. Sorry about my squeaky chair. Alright. So let's see. That sound is off, so I'm not hearing an echo. Alright. So basically I'm going to try to up my work ethic a little bit and stream animation videos, because sometimes I'm just sitting here drawing and I feel disconnected from the world. So I'm just like, maybe if I live stream it'll be like a hangout. Like when I was in high school, you'd just be in the art room drawing stuff and there'd be people there hanging out, and it would just feel a little less like I'm in prison. Anyway, so yeah, this is the live stream. I made a new title shot for it, so to give people a chance to log in. I guess 2 people are watching. YouTube doesn't really tell you anything about that, but anyway, I guess we can start.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Okay.
Alright, so what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be working on a cartoon that I've been working on for a while now. Let's see. Basically, some characters are walking out of this diner, and one character snatches some cigarettes from the other character.
Dude, let's go around back.
Takes one. And I'm working on this character right here. So I'm just trying to make this scene look a little bit more interesting. These are characters that were written by a comedian in Connecticut named Pat Oates, and this one's Corey and this one's Steven, and they're kind of like teenagers, and they were sent to the store to get some cigarettes, and he's stealing one out of the pack, which kind of characterizes him as like a mischievous person. So let's see, I left off last time drawing the Corey character taking a bite out of a sandwich. Let's see, how do I want to do this? I'm just gonna set my timer to an hour, just because my streams tend to crash after an hour. So let's see, what do I need to do? So he's got to take a bite of his sandwich, and then he's got to turn to be ready to catch the box of cigarettes that this Steven character is going to throw to him. So I have to make him, in this amount of time here, I have to make him bite the sandwich and then turn back to catch the package of cigarettes. So let's see, what frames did I not finish drawing? I think I want to make him do a couple of chews in between, because he took the bite but he didn't really chew very much. Alright, maybe I'll just work on these frames for now, just to get moving, and I'll think about it as I progress. So these are like keyframes here. Basically, you make the most important movements and work out the timing, and then you kind of do the in-between frames. I'm not a professional animator. I don't really get paid for this. But in the old days, it seemed like you know, there'd be a more professional master animator, and he'd do all the keyframes, and then he'd have like an apprentice do the in-between frames. But I'm pretty, I'm not that fancy. So let's see, I like to make the frame that comes before the one I'm working on, either red or blue, and then the one after it, whichever one I didn't pick for the first one, so I can kind of tell which one happened first and which one happened second. And it makes it easier to not get confused. So let's see. So his hand was here and now it's moving there, and I got to put the transitional frame in between. So let's see. Here's half of his sandwich, and I'm going to draw in a different color later, so I'm just going to put some dots here to mark where I'm going to draw a different colored line. Maybe that'll make sense later, but so when you're in betweening frames, you basically just draw whatever you're working on in a transitional space. Like there's this hand over here, and there's the ending hand and the beginning hand, and it would be in the middle as it's moving, so I'm just drawing the in-between frame. So here's kind of a mess. I didn't really do this line in between because there's such a thing as called squash and stretch in animation, which kind of gives the characters like a rubbery look, or their movements are rubbery, and it just helps to exaggerate, because sometimes it's hard to, you know, tell what a character is doing in 2D space, and so there are a lot of exaggerated movements. And so, like, if you know how, like, when a basketball hits the ground, it kind of squashes, and then when it's bouncing up, it stretches a little bit, and before it returns to its spherical shape. Like if you watch a basketball bouncing in slow motion, you would see that when it hits the ground, it just squishes down into an oblate spheroid, and then it stretches again as the energy moves it up into the air. And cartoon characters are a lot like that. So when I made the head, when I moved this line outward, like this face is just squashing down because he's taking a bite and his whole head is reacting to the squashing of it. So let's see. I didn't really make the lower body move that much. Technically, I don't have to draw these feet because they're below the line of where the camera is going to capture, but I just like to do it as a placeholder. Because sometimes when you're drawing frames, every time you draw a new frame, it's going to be a little bit different from the first frame that you drew, and that tends to make characters evolve in ways that you wouldn't expect. And I don't know, I just find it a good idea to just keep track of where things that are out of camera are sometimes. Oops. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be because of all the booze. Some of this stuff is a little bit boring to watch because I'm just tracing the drawings that I drew earlier and just making them slightly different. Oops. You're never going to get a perfect, line, but sometimes I like drawing, like there are some times when you can just copy the drawing from the previous frame if there's no movement and repeat it again for the next frame, but I find that that looks more stiff, and it's more organic if you just draw the frames again. Okay, so he starts chewing around. Oh, this was the message I wrote from the last stream that I did. Okay, so he starts chewing about here in these frames up here. I think I'm just going to in between the bites, or the bite, singular. We'll do this one right here. So these frames are already blue and red, which is convenient. And sometimes I just like drawing in yellow as a third color, just because it stands out from the other two. So this head, it was taller in the first drawing, and then it got shorter in the one after it because of the squashing and stretching thing that I was talking about. I have Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom soundtrack stuck in my head. So if I just start to whistle, it's not something I'm really conscious of sometimes. I just whistle all the time. And it kind of annoys people a lot, and I don't mean to. I used to work in a warehouse, and I'd be working, and then suddenly I'd hear somebody yell, "Dan, stop your incessant whistling!" But I don't know, some people like it. Why do I have green selected? Okay. So his teeth are kind of enclosing on the sandwich. Sometimes subtle movements like eating or taking a cigarette out of a box of cigarettes are they're a little trickier to do than, let's say, having a character run around with a gun and shooting at things, which is what I used to do a lot when I was a kid. I first started animating when I was probably about 12 years old, and my first animation program was called Disney Animation Studio, and that was like in the 90s, so computers were not very sophisticated, and you could only really draw maybe about 15 frames before the computer ran out of memory. And I animate at like 12 frames per second, so yeah, that was only like a little over a second worth of animation. And sometimes you could string them together, and I would try to make these stories where I would draw like, wait, I don't know if that's true. Wait, you could draw more than 12. Maybe you could. I think it was like you could draw 12 seconds, not 12 frames, like I said. But I'd have these little bits of 12-second animations, and I'd stream them together, and you couldn't really watch the whole movie at once. You'd have to like watch 15 seconds and then shut that off, and then load up the next animation, then watch the next 15 seconds. And I would draw this character named Mystery Jim, and he was kind of like he had kind of like a Star Trek suit on. He looked a little bit like these characters. And he'd be running around zapping aliens in his Star Trek suit. I think I have some animations of him on my main GhostyFilms channel. And they're all pixelated. With today's technology, I was able to string them all together and kind of make a semi-coherent story out of it. But I was like a kid when I made those old Mystery Jim cartoons. So they're very fast. Like, you kind of probably might have to watch them a couple of times to understand what's happening, because everything races by so quickly. It's basically just, you know, a space guy running around shooting things, which is probably what you'd expect from a 12-year-old kid. But my character's kind of evolved a little bit since I was a kid. Basically, my drawing style was sort of like Mario from the Nintendo universe, where Mario kind of had like, he had a nose like that, and then he'd have an eye right on top of his nose, and then another eye. Actually, they would like, he was always cross-eyed for some reason, and then he'd have a mustache that went like this, and then he had like kind of like a double chin, and then he had like this little curly hair like that, and the brim of his hat was up like that, and then he'd go, I think sometimes he had a little button there, and then he had a thing here, and it was an M. And the first character I drew was of myself, and I drew it in the Mario style, where it was like kind of like that, same cross-eyed, and I drew the curly hair, and then I did like this, and then that was probably when I was in the 5th grade, and I drew myself looking like this without the mustache. And then eventually I just kind of like, there were lots of evolution, like eventually, like I for some reason I stopped drawing the jaw past his nose. Like, for a while I just drew the nose like that, and I kind of made the eyeball like a dot instead of the cross-eyed Mario look, and I drew like this for a while, and I think for a while I had the curly thing there, but it just got, my drawing style went simpler and simpler, and I eventually just went back to like this proto Mario type of thing. Now I think I give a little bit of space between his, I give him a little bit of a forehead now, I think. But this is the basic male character. Like, all my father used to make fun of me because because all my characters basically had this same face, but they had a different haircut. Like, there'd be this guy, and he'd have a spiked haircut, but the same basic face. And my father would always like, all your characters are the same, but they have a different haircut. And I had like, the Dan character was this face, but had blonde hair, and then I had another character named Happy Man, which was basically a rip-off of the Punisher from Marvel. Well, his costume was, he had a different personality completely, but his costume just looked pretty much like the Punisher, except he had a smiley face. And I even think I ripped that off because I saw a parody of the Punisher called the Pummeler, and he had a smiley face, and I just made Happy Man with this smiley face, but he had black hair, so it was a completely different guy. But now my character, I pretty much draw him like something like this, like, and that's the Dan Brown character that is used in KR47. But these characters I'm drawing here are actually written by Pat Oates, and this is the character from Corey, his name is Corey, and then the other character is Steven, and I guess Steven is kind of like an alternate dimension version of Teenage Pat, and this is like an alternate dimension version of Teenage Dan. And he's just got like dots for eyes, and his ear sticks out through his hair. Basically, when I was talking to Pat about what these characters would look like, he just said, okay, well, this character kind of looks like a teenage me, and you can make that character a stoner or teenage version of you, but I've never used drugs, I'm not a stoner, so I just kind of like, I don't know, I just drew a different version of myself. And I'm playing this character like I voiced this character in the series, so kind of like I just read the dialogue and try to do the best I can, imagining how this character would talk. But anyway, I gotta go back to this. Where was I? So yeah, when you're doing the in-betweening, or when you're animating, basically, it's very important to be able to see what happened before the frame you're currently working on. And the name for the drawings that happen in the past or future are generally referred to as onion skin, because onions are thin and you can see through them, and like you're treating this drawing like it's been drawn on a plastic sheet of celluloid that you can see through, so you can tell what happened before. And so now I can see where I drew the shoelaces in the past and the future, and I can just draw the line in between them. Hopefully you can hear the sound, because I've tried streaming a couple of times and the sound didn't even come through at all. So maybe somebody can let me know if you can hear me or whatever. Oh well, nobody commented, but hopefully you can hear me. Alright, so this frame I kind of drew in a bunch of different colors, so I'm just going to make this blue to differentiate between past and future. This one I'm just going to make all red. His head's squashing down a little bit. So let's see, what does this look like? Draw some guide dots. What is this? Sometimes it gets a little bit difficult to understand the chaos of lines that you're looking at. See what this looks like. Not too bad. I don't know, he's like a teenage character, so I just kind of made his movements look a bit like a ravenous shark, because teenagers supposedly never stop eating. More boring in between frames. So, oh yeah, I should probably promote my my regular channel. My regular channel is just GhostyFilms, and you can actually see some of my completed work there. Most of the animated stuff is KR47, which is a series that I wrote with my friend Rob Lowe, who's another person who grew up in West Haven and loves comedy and creating things. And I used to work with him at a bookstore, and he would always be like, ball busting, and I'd come into work and he'd just be like making fun of me, but it was always so funny to me, like the ways that he would make fun of me, and I would just laugh so hard, and he'd just come up to me and start saying all kinds of crazy stuff, and I would just try to keep it going as long as possible, because he was just like really quick on the, he was a quick thinker, and then eventually I was like, because I'd been animating already for a while, and I just figured, man, maybe it would be funny if I started making cartoons about this guy. And we made a lot of cartoon shorts that were all dialogue based, and some of them, like, we were much younger. I think we started doing animations back in like 2007, which is over 10 years ago. And some of the comedy ideas that we came up with were very, like when comedians start out, they tend to have like a very gross, dark sense of humor, and because they're just making each other laugh, like when you're a young male anyway, you're just trying to make your male friends laugh, like that's your audience. Like, you don't ever have to perform in front of old ladies or women. And I've found that women tend to just laugh at different things. Like, if your audience is all male, you can pretty much go as dark and weird as possible, but then, I don't know, when you start doing comedy in front of middle-aged or 40 or 50-year-old like couples, they just start judging you a little bit more, and you have to censor yourself. The thing about when males get together and start making each other laugh is, like, I feel like there's a respect for unbridled craziness, and like, we all know we're not really horrible people. Like, we know each other, so it's like you can go anywhere. You can say any shocking type of joke that you want, and everybody's like appreciates it for the joke value. Like, to me, jokes are basically they're like inconsistencies or anomalies in logic, like something that makes sense on the surface but doesn't make sense when you think about it a little bit longer. That often translates to funny. And like, I think young men just kind of they just look for any opportunity to have an anomaly in logic, and they don't care if it's socially acceptable. And there's something nice about that in a way, But if that's what your strength is, and you try to go in front of a paying audience, it doesn't always work. And so I think a lot of male comedians are just starting out. They always seem to start as gross as possible or as dark as possible because their only audience has been other male friends who have that. They have a love for logical anomalies and not what's socially acceptable. Whereas I think female culture seems like they're a lot more concerned with how they're perceived, and I feel like society will judge a woman more harshly if she goes outside of the box. But for some reason, like if men do it, it's like, oh, he's just being one of the boys or something like that. So in a way, it's kind of like it might be a little harder for a woman to be a comedian, but then again, like a lot of the males who do dark stuff that they would do in front of their friends, those comedians don't always do well in front of a paying audience either. So it's really hard to generalize about comedy. But anyway, when I started animating and started writing cartoons, a lot of our material was very dark and young men oriented humor, where it's just like we didn't care if anybody thought we were gross or weird. We're just like looking for outside of the box stuff that would make us laugh, and we didn't really care about people who would censor us or judge us for being weird. Like we were just looking for weird stuff to write jokes about. And I do stand-up comedy now, and I feel like sometimes that's a problem that I deal with even today, where it's like, okay, I can go to a bar, and that audience wants to hear the darkest, grossest material you can think of, and then you can go to a like Hartford venue, and then completely different kinds of people are there, and it's like, okay, the jokes that work in this bar are not going to work here, and it's like you got to find something that works both places, and or you just don't do the jokes that you do in bars in a more, I don't know, family oriented venue. But having said that, I actually think that when women are crazy in the comedy world, I prefer that personally. Like my favorite comedians who are women are Maria Bamford, who's like has a lot of crazy opinions and crazy mannerisms. I think I like self-deprecating humor the best. Right, where am I? Anyway, so yeah, on my channel, most of the cartoons there are KR47, and they're dark humor that you probably wouldn't like it unless you're a young man. For the reasons I just tried to illustrate. Some of it's like more fantasy based, magic and swords and sorcery and stuff. Some of it's like early stuff that I did when I was really young, and I focused more on superhero comedy back when I used to submit cartoons to Newgrounds.com, which is a Flash animation site, or it was at that time. I haven't really been there in years. But I'm making this channel because I don't like having all these streams of me working on stuff mixed in with the finished products. It just like I want that site to be for finished products, and I made this site today too, so I could fill it up with tutorials, and I could have that old school art room feel where it's like I'm just working on a project and I'm in the art room and I'm not in a prison cell, not talking to anybody. But yeah, this is the first cartoon I've worked on with Pat Oates, and and it's the first time I probably worked with another comedian who does stand-up. I think I would like to at some point have a public access TV show where I compile all my cartoons and try to come up with. I'm probably gonna. It takes so long to make animation, so maybe I'll try to shoot for 10 episodes, and I'll try to compile a public access show of some kind, and most of the cartoons will be my old cartoons, and there'll be some new stuff that I've written in there too. But I'm thinking I would like to maybe work with a few other comedians, not for like a long cartoon like this, but more like the cartoons would be sketch oriented. Like for example, if you look at Saturday Night Live, there would be like a guest host, and the guest host would be in sketches that were written for that person's, sense of humor. And so I'm thinking I'll have this public access show. Probably won't be for a while. It probably won't be ready for a while, but basically the majority of the content would just be cartoons that I've already done. And maybe a couple of episodes of this Pat series, and then I will ask like a local comedian if they will write some sketches and voice act them, and then I'll animate them and include them, and then maybe there would be some kind of like monologue in the beginning, if that, I don't know. I feel like maybe I should talk to a bunch of comedians and see how they feel about it. Like, it's almost more like the Muppet Show than it would be SNL. So maybe a monologue wouldn't be necessary. There should be something in the show that introduces the guest comedian and promotes, their Twitter or whatever social media they use to promote their own shows. But a while ago, there's a comedian named Giancarlo Biondino, and I kind of brought it up with him, about whether or not he would write some animated sketches and voice act in them, and he seemed like he was interested, but that was a long time ago, and he may have forgotten, so I'm probably going to have to ask him again. There's some other comedians that I would like to work with that I have in mind. Like, I do this Twitter account. It's basically, it's a bot that retweets the comedy events going on in Connecticut. It's the Twitter account is @CTComedyBot, and you can log on there, and it will tell you what's going on in Connecticut comedy-wise. And if you're not familiar with Twitter, basically they give you the option of having a pinned tweet at the top of your Twitter profile, And I was thinking, like, what could I put there? And it just seemed like if it's a comedy bot that's supposed to make people aware of comedy, that space should be used for making people aware of talented comedians in the area. And so I started doing this comedy bot poll on the comedy thread for comedians on Facebook, and where all the comedians just kind of vote for their favorite comedian, or the most hardworking comedian, or whatever comedian they feel deserves to be in the spotlight or deserves to be promoted. Like what comedian puts Connecticut comedy's best foot forward? And so I had a poll where everybody can vote. And so whoever wins the poll gets like a pinned tweet at the top of the comedy bot, and that comedian is promoted for that month. So yeah, I'm thinking that when I do start this SNL Muppet Show animated sketch public access thing, like, there are a couple of winners from that I think I would like to ask to write and act in an animated show. I gotta take a drink because I'm starting to sound all raspy. Okay, where am I? So these frames are all pretty much done. I'm just going to change the ink color to black. Gotta save my thing every once in a while. So let's see. How long have I been streaming? It doesn't really tell me. Oh wait, I did set my stopwatch. 40 minutes. Wow. Who'd have thought my vocal cords would feel so dry and dead from talking for 40 minutes. Alright, got it in between these feet. I hope the sound is coming through, because I tried recording a bunch of these already and the sound didn't go through. I did some tests before I started this and the sound was coming through, but I did tests for the other ones before this, and even though it worked in the beginning, it didn't work on the stream. So boy, will that be annoying if it doesn't work. So yeah, even though these legs don't move, I like to draw them again because it gives it a more organic feel. If I just copied and pasted the legs over and over again, they would look like they were made out of cement, and it would be weird because, like, you'd have this organic moving torso and head and arms, but you'd have this cement legs, and I don't like the way that looks. So let's see, where is he looking? Maybe he should be looking to the stage right until around this frame. How do I want to deal with this? Zoom out a bit. Alright. I guess I can delete this message that I left myself since that's already done. Alright, what do I need to do next? Probably make this sandwich. Not flow into the same space as his teeth. Okay, so let's see. Just a ravenous shark bite. Alright, so let's see. I gotta figure out how I'm gonna deal with this space here in between this frame and this frame. I feel like I want him to be looking this way a couple of, like maybe a beat or two. I've had this song from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom just repeating over in my head. There's like a scene at the beginning of Temple of Doom where the singer Willie Scott is singing an old 1920s Tin Pan Alley song. I think it's by Cole Porter or something. But it's Anything Goes, but she sings it in Chinese. I always thought that was kind of a cool scene. I'm not I'm musical in that I play music, but I'm not musical in that I don't like musical movies. But I don't know, there's kind of a cool touch for the movie. Sometimes I forget that Indiana Jones is supposed to be a period story. I mean, yeah, most of them have Nazis and stuff in them, which is World War II era. But I don't know, it just looks so crisp and clean that it just feels, it feels timeless almost. Like the imagery anyway is crisp and timeless anyway. But I really like listening to movie soundtracks. I've always liked how you can synthesize all the arts into one and make a movie. Like, you synthesize the visual photographic element of movie making and the musical and the acting, and it's like it's just so many different components all coalescing into one final product. Where should this hand be? And I've always felt like music is just a language of emotion. For example, like if you hear a dog and it makes noises, you can kind of get an idea for what the animal's mood is based on the noises it makes. Like it could whimper. Like my friend's dog Callie, like my friend had this German Shepherd, and it needed a lot of attention. Like it was a very sensitive dog, and if you picked up your keys, and it would think, "Oh, I get to go outside," but maybe you didn't. Maybe you were going somewhere that you couldn't bring a dog, and then you'd be like, "Oh no, you can't come with me, Callie," and she would groan like a teenager. She'd be, "Oh," she'd just make this depressed, "Oh no, come on," like this noise that just sounded exactly like like a teenager would make when the teenager was rolling his eyes, or "Mom," like it would just make that, but there was no word. It would just grunt that same exact sound. And like music to me is just a language like that. Like just certain sounds represent certain emotions. It's like an emotional language that only deals with emotions and not more abstract ideas. And I just think it's interesting how you can write music for a movie and accentuate what the characters are feeling using that language of emotion. And so sometimes I feel like I like watching documentaries about how movies are made more than the actual finished product themselves sometimes. And I just like thinking about, like, how does music help the scene? And I often listen to a lot of soundtracks to sort of study them. And especially since I'm an animator and I make my own animated products, I feel like it's a good thing for me to be aware of. And so sometimes I listen to like the Indiana Jones soundtrack or Aliens. Alien has a really creepy soundtrack that I really love. So let's see, if his arm is kind of shifting around, where does his arm compare to this frame? Well, maybe I'll just make it, if I feel like my gut is telling me to make it a little bit lower. Oops. I'm just gonna, I think when your body is at rest, you kind of sag a little bit. Just gonna make his hand a little bit lower. But I would really like to make a movie at some point in my life. Right now, I want to tell certain stories that I would need actors to make in order to make the story work. And I don't really have a lot of actors at my disposal. I don't have money to pay actors, and so one of the things that kind of made me want to do these live streams of animation is that I was watching this comic book artist do live streams of his drawing process, and he was making a comic. And I'm the type of person who, whenever I see somebody doing something creative, I'm just like, I want to do that too. I want to do that. Like, my personality for art is kind of like a dog. Like, if you shake keys at a dog and they're like, oh, keys, that means we go outside. I want to go outside. Can I go outside? Like, whenever I see somebody like drawing a comic, I'm like, I want to draw a graphic novel. I want to do that. I want to do that. And so that kind of made me want to do two things when I was watching this comic book artist. Obviously, I want to draw a graphic novel now, and I wanted to live stream my animation, and I'm making content, and like on two levels. Like I'm making the content of having this weird autobiographical narrative as I'm doing the animation, but I'm also completing a product. I feel like I keep rambling and I never conclude any of the things that I start talking about. Anyway, I was talking about making movies and not having access to actors and the money available. And I was watching this comic book artist who makes his own graphic novel drawing streams. And so there's the whole thing about the dog where it's like, I want to do that. I want to go make a graphic novel. And so I was thinking that I can tell a story in a graphic novel that I can't tell in an animation or a movie, because I can draw characters and I can make dialogue bubbles, and I don't need multiple people to do that. I can just draw all the characters and I can just make them say whatever I want them to say. And so I can tell a more epic, classic adventure story in a comic, because I don't need to worry about a lot. Like, all I gotta do is draw it and write it. And so I think in the near future I'm gonna be I already wrote the outline of the story, and I need to figure out a lot of the specific details and figure out a lot of the dialogue. But at some point I'm going to be putting together a graphic novel, I think. Hopefully I don't fizzle out and, I make it happen. But basically the graphic novel is in the world of... It's going to be called I think it's going to be called The Chronicles of Nuwak. And it's basically about this character that I made when I was younger called... His name's Nuwak, and he's a young wizard. And it's not... Like, when I say that, it sounds like people are going to be like, oh, what are you ripping off Harry Potter? But no, it's not like about cute little kids in school. This is like a alternate medieval times dimension. Like, if you think of Lord of the Rings, it's not historical. There are no countries that exist in Lord of the Rings that are actual countries. It's just like an alternate dimension Earth. And it's kind of like that. But it's gritty, and none of the wizards are really skilled with magic. It's like a story that takes place in a time where human beings were just discovering magic and exploring the interface of magic. Like, they're just experimenting with what magic is and how it works, and nobody really knows anything about it other than it was given to them by the gods with certain, with what am I trying to say? With a certain interface that I don't want to really give away at the moment. And their religion basically states that gods are adults and mortals are children, and that in order to grow up and be an adult, you have to study magic and become as capable with magic as you can. And that's a level of your maturity in their culture. And they just believe that mortals grow up into gods by learning the workings of magic in the universe, and yeah, that's how they grow into adulthood. And so I kind of have a story about the main character, which is actually, you can there are animations of this character on my main GhostyFilms YouTube page that you can watch if you're interested, but they're not really good because I felt like there was a lot of explanation. Like if you take a first year creative writing class, one of the things they always tell you is to show, don't tell. Show these things. Don't just have a character telling you. And so there was just so much intricate stuff that needed to be explained, and I just had my character going about his day and like wandering through the wilderness, and I was just explaining all this complicated stuff in the background through a voiceover, and I don't think it worked. But I was thinking if I could make the same character as a child being taught all the things that he needs to learn by his grandfather, that would be a way to show all this stuff and not tell it. And so basically the story starts off when the main character is a little kid, and they're a very secretive family because they live in a kind of a town. It's actually like a city that's carved into stone, and there are all these barbarians that live all around them. And they're not really barbarians. It's kind of rude to call a culture barbaric, but these people are primitive in that they, like, their outlook on the world is it's centered around their own culture, and they kind of like have this almost like an arrogant view of themselves where they think that they are God's chosen people, which a lot of religions do that. And so that's kind of like to be expected of a society that's at this technological level. And so they kind of view outsiders as being barbarians, which is something that cultures have done throughout history. So they're very secretive, and they don't really they don't really share their abilities with outsiders or barbarians. But the main character's father. All right, I gotta describe one more thing before I say that. Okay, so because their religion tells them to grow up into gods, and their part of their mission while on this planet is to learn as much about magic as possible. Occasionally, when they're in their early teens, mid-20s or so, maybe even older than that, but they go on these missions to explore the world of barbarian peoples and basically chronicle or document uses of magic, because they need it in order to, for their, in order for them to, their society to eventually go to heaven, I guess, with the powers that they've learned and master magic in the world to the point where they can ascend into heaven. So while the main character's father is out doing this and looking for evidence of magic and cultures who are magic users, he comes to a village that has been just razed to the ground, but he finds this boy who's alive, and this is a boy that he feels is like a barbarian, but he's not just going to leave him there in the smoldering wreckage of their village. so he just adopts him. And there's all this kind of like controversy about what to do with him. Like, he's an outsider. Some of the people in their society are kind of like prejudiced toward him, and they kind of view him as like a barbarian. He's not. He doesn't have the ability to learn magic. And so there's like, that's another opportunity to explain what the complexities of the culture are, because you have a kid who's just learning them, and you have an outsider who is coming to grips with what it means to live in this society. So I have all kinds of opportunities to show who these people are, rather than just tell you in a voiceover like I did before. And because I'm going to be doing all this in graphic novel, I can work with multiple characters, which is what is needed for a story to be told on this scale. I have multiple characters that I can use, and I don't have to deal with actors and have them, you know, sometimes the thing about actors when you're a low-level movie maker or animator is that sometimes, because you don't have a reputation of being this fancy pants, you know, director or whatever who has clout and you know, respect in the community, actors just think they can just shit all over what you're doing and then just criticize it, because you know, the thing about artists is that their heads are so far up their own asses half the time that it's just sometimes it's a pain in the ass to deal with people. And if I can just draw all this stuff, I don't have to deal with actors. I don't have to deal with you know, I don't have to write a soundtrack and record it, which is something I often have to do. And like, I don't really have optimal places to record music. I just have to do it in my basement. I can't make a John Williams soundtrack with just a few microphones and a dingy old basement and a guitar. So I'm thinking that this graphic novel idea is going to be the best way to tell the story. Let's see, it's been an hour. My live streams always crash around the hour, so I'm just going to stop this, but I'm going to continue it and start it back up. So I'll be right back. Let's see, how do I do this? Maybe I just stop streaming on my OBS software.